Commission for Dismantling Racism for the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. A sought-after teacher and workshop leader, Catherine brings 4 decades of experience to the work of transforming the dismantling racism work in Atlanta. The core of her work has been with people who have been marginalized because of economic status, race, gender, or physical ability as they pursue liberation, justice, and access to resources that can help lead them to health, wellness, and a more abundant life. This work grows out of her understanding of her call to the vocation of teacher, as well as her realization that all of humanity is one family which God desires to unite. Let us pray. Gracious and loving, life-giving God, we give thanks for this time together. We give thanks for the opportunity to open our hearts further, enrich our mind, gain new understanding of ourselves and our world. Be with us, inspire us, lead us where you would have us go. Amen.
It's my turn now.
Absolutely.
Well, good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I hope that you have rested well and dreamed well and find yourselves ready to face the surprises of this day that we've never seen before. I'm delighted to be a part of this conversation. I would not be egotistical enough to think that I can talk for 2 hours and not have a conversation with you. So I will talk for a while, and then we'll have some time for you to make comments or ask questions or whatever, and then I will say some more. The topic on racial healing and racialized trauma is an enormous topic that we won't be able to do justice in one meeting, but we can say some things, I think, that can be inspiring and encouraging and help you to continue the work that you're already doing. I am delighted to hear what you're doing already. I was just in Sacramento over the weekend, and I was saying to people there how encouraging it is to see people all around the Episcopal Church, all around this country, stepping up to the plate to try to become more conscious and more engaged with making this planet a place where it will be fit for everybody to live on it. And the actual truth is that that's the only choice we've got. We can either make the place sustainable so everybody can live together, which is what Dr. King said all those years ago, or else we will just all perish together. Either way, we're going to do it together. And I think that that's one of the things that we seem to misunderstand, that there are some people who think that perhaps there's a way for some people to escape some of what is happening and what is going to happen if we don't become a bit more conscious about the ways in which we need to go about trying to construct our lives together. So I'm delighted and really honored to be a part of your ongoing journey of doing the work of justice and the work of healing, because that is the only work there is to do. And I want to say to you that I have become a complete and unashamed and not willing to negotiate evangelist for the notion that none of the work that we do will ever be sustainable unless we are willing to do our own work and our inner work. I mean, we can be as big and famous and public as we want to be, but if we haven't done our own work, it matters. It will not matter. It will not matter. And whatever we're doing will not be sustainable, because there is such a correlation between what is happening inside of us, each of us, and how the world is being manifested outside of us. Understand that's a complicated way to think about the world, and that most people don't think about the world that way. Most people think about the world in terms of this is real, what's out here, and I don't know what's going on inside of me. But you're in the business of helping people reflect upon what's going on inside of them and how what is happening inside of them is engaged in what's going on outside of them. And so, just that understanding and a commitment to doing that work in that way shifts everything. You have to ask yourselves, how is it that we have been working on dismantling racism and destabilizing injustice and meanness and atrocities for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we don't seem to have made much progress? And part of that reason is that we have not done a good enough job of dealing with the stuff inside of ourselves that keep making that external craziness make sense to us. And as long as that external craziness makes sense to our inner selves, we will keep on doing it. The status quo makes more sense than destabilizing it to the unconscious human being. So a lot of what I have to say today will definitely be about justice and looking at healing and trauma and all of that. But it's about all of us. All of us are wounded. All of us have been wounded by racism, no matter what color you are, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. If you live in this country, and I'm just going to stick to this country because this is where I have lived all my life, you could probably put this out into the rest of the world, but I'm not trying to be that grandiose this morning. If I live in this country, we live in this country, nobody lives in this country without having been impacted in some way or another by the white supremacist systems that have been put into place. And I think that white people in general, perhaps you may be exceptions, don't get how wounded the system has been for them. So we get caught in thinking that we're doing something for people out there, for people of color, but really, as Howard Thurman has encouraged us to think about, we're working to get our own selves out of prison. We're working to get our own selves out of prison, and in the process, we're helping to liberate the planet. It's so much of a different way to think about what we're doing than thinking we got it all together and we're going out here to fix something. Because basically, if that's the case, all of us might as well just sit down and be in great despair because the stuff we're trying to fix won't let us fix it. And so we have to keep on trying and trying and trying. But as we work on this from this other kind of a perspective, it makes a big difference. And we'll get into that more in a few minutes. One of the other things that I want to say, I want to show you share with you a spoken word piece that really does capture a lot of what I want to say. And then I have a couple of pieces of Native poetry that I want to read as another bookend because I want you to, because I know in your particular diocese, your bigger issue has to do with Indigenous people than with African Americans necessarily. But the point is that oppression is oppression, and racialized trauma is racialized trauma. It doesn't matter if it's happening to Black people or Native people or Latinx people or Asian people. The trauma that has been inflicted upon people of color ends up to be, it's an energy. It's a way of using energy in a bad way, and it causes damage no matter who's on the other end of it. And the damage we don't really understand. We don't know how to measure all of that. We just know that it's a serious thing that happens, and it happens to any group of people that are being treated that way, basically because of their ethnicity. That you are being misused, abused, marginalized, and your person is being violated, which is what trauma is, a violation of your personhood in some way or another that ends up causing you damage. And it's happening to you mostly, not even mostly, all of the time, simply because of the color of your skin. And to have a collection of people who have experienced that contributes to creating a set of dilemmas that are really difficult to navigate. And then I think one of the primary questions that you have to ask is, what happens? You can say all you want to about the people that are being traumatized, but you also have to be questioning what is happening to the person who is inflicting the trauma. How is that person being impacted? When we study lynching in the South, we talk about the victims, but everybody is a victim. Those folks raiding the homes of Black and brown people and killing them in those violent ways have no clue what they're doing to themselves. They think they're protecting something. I don't know exactly what they think they're protecting, except a way of life that they feel like it belongs to them because their skin is white. But you cannot be the person who practices that kind of traumatization without being wounded yourself, and deeply wounded. When I'm doing dismantling racism work and ask a room full of white folks to talk about how racism has injured them, that is the longest silence of the day, because it's so difficult for them to think about how that's been wounding, because it's, you don't realize that the wounding, much of it is very deep psychological and spiritual wounding. And that whole new area, I guess it's fairly new anyway, of epigenetics that talks about the kind of how trauma or many other kinds of things too follow generations. We don't yet know what is the result of the trauma in slavery and the earlier with the genocide against the Native peoples. We don't know how that's impacting generations, but what we do know is that all of these groups, particularly African Americans and Native people, are having a really hard time in the present moment because of what happened to them in the past. And so when white people say to me, why are we still talking about race? I mean, can we just be okay? Can we, you're a whole lot more free than you used to be. That happens to be part of the truth. We are a little freer than we used to be, but it's such a statement of unconsciousness not to understand how those deep wounds cannot be erased just because you can now sit on the front seat in the bus. Because sitting in the back of the bus, while it was highly problematic, getting to sit in the front of the bus after being forced to sit in the back of the bus, just being able to move to the front doesn't erase the damage that's been done to your soul. And we don't know how that damage gets passed on to other people. And I have some clues about that we'll talk about some in a minute. But right now I want to share with you the short video that was made by one of my staff people that sums up the racializing trauma that happens to African Americans. And then I'll have a piece of poetry that sums up in a very beautiful way, a piece of poetry by the former Poet Laureate Joy Harjo of Native people. And then I want to talk about white folks and that whole equation, and then talk about how in the present moment, that past process of traumatizing continues, which is what makes us have so much work to do in front of us. By the time we do all that, we'll need a little break, and you'll be probably having a question or two by then. So so Reverend Holly, can we see the video?
My name is stereotype. Judged and justified by the color of my skin, I secretly wonder if we can ever be friends. I'm the shade of black and brown. I represent legal systems that are sought to keep us bound. Biases, they plaster me with their colors. Are you redlining the color of my skin, making access harder because I have to fight systems from within? Housing, education, criminal justice, just to name a few. Unconscious bias shapes the world and systems around you. Same offense, different life sentence. The criminal charge was being black from the start. Sentenced to black maternity health care issues because the real issue was the color of my black skin. Now, I'll admit, sometimes I feel like 1/3 of property returning us back to our ugly historical ancestry. And I want to cry from within. Can you hear my pain? This pain. It leaves me numb like Novocaine. Knick-knack, paddywhack, give a dog a bone. Because I'm constantly reminded that we have greater regard for a dog's life than my own. Melanin, the color of my skin, and all that comes with it. Microaggressions, painful connections, pressure to be something I am not. White America, pain of my ancestors, and the lineage of inequality continues. Housing inequality, Eurocentric curriculums that says to me that my black history is an elective and is optional, just like I am. Eurocentric curriculums shaping young minds to perceive one side of the story, never telling them that we are all worthy, and that's privilege. All kind of taglines, assumptions, and guidelines to make me acceptable. Targeted by the police, trying to prove that I too am worthy of release because he suspected that something about me looked suspicious. Racial profiling, never considering that I am falling. And I have a panic attack on the spot. How did you afford that car? He asks. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? Why are you in this neighborhood? This is a nice car.
Can we see the picture?
Well, that's what we were trying to do. Our tech check earlier, we thought we had worked it out. Teresa, what do you suggest we do as a workaround?
I am going to start the video and kind of try to scroll to the place we are. And apologies for these difficulties.
And if it doesn't work, hearing the message is the main point. So
okay, thank you for your graciousness.
To hold people that look like me in captivity. I heard what my friend said, but I figured that I'd go to her house instead. Hiding and not free, I wanted to call my mom to get me. Constantly on my mind, I had to keep looking over my shoulders to assure I'd be fine. Fined for this black skin I was born in. I've had several experiences like these. If not managed, that paranoia can bring a person to their knees. Constantly looking over my shoulders, holding my purse far out so they don't think I stole it. Having to look them in the eyes, hoping they'll remember that I too deserve to survive. When driving through certain towns, I will admit I take the long way. I know better than to drive through certain towns. I seek to save my life, so I take the extra time to avoid the rounds of bullets to the heart and possibly to my skin. Because the person who stopped me failed to realize and see that I too have a soul within. 911, what's your emergency? The emergency is me, cold-blooded killer, no technology this time to affirm me. So my blood screams out from the ground, seeking for someone to name the ugly truth so that we may begin to reclaim our grounds. And in your line of questioning, don't forget to question what culture has taught you about me. No, I don't care for rap music. I prefer country and R&B. Can you stop for a minute and not judge me? Watermelons, cotton picking, and no, I'm not a great dancer, but I dance anyway to remind myself that I am freer than any of my ancestors. No equal representation, code switching for protection, perceived as a threat, trying not to regret this black skin I was born in. Guilty until proven innocent. The law has been reversed, and it also reversed my innocence. I had a fear of being judged, so I lived my life in tension. Finally realizing that I can never convince someone else of my own significance. Made in the image of God, I am not inherently more dangerous. I am not more violent. You don't have to be fearful of me. I am not an animal. I did not come from a monkey, and no, I cannot wash my black skin off. Surprised I can speak with the eloquence you see? These are just some of the things that plague me. Worried for my brother, crying for my mother, missing my father as well. If you haven't gotten the picture at this point, it's all from a hateful, wicked, white supremacist system. Can't you tell? Amnesia. Why don't you remember? You don't see the daily effects of how this traumatizes me or my family members. Look closer. Don't you see that modern day excuse for captivity? I long to be heard, but I'm told to be silent. After all, I'm better off than they were. PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder, and I fight it every day. I fight the internalized oppression that tells me to just throw up my hands, give up, and walk away. PTSD. Even science shows I remember my ancestors' trauma in my body's cells, that they are in prison cells. The criminal justice system is going to hell, and I fight the thought that things will always be this way. Like Rosa Parks, we've parked in our comfort. We sit on different parts of the bus. We live in two different realities. When we stand up, they hang us. Hang us with their foot on our necks. Get your foot off of my neck. A modern day lynching, a reminder to subject. Gasping for air. When will we realize that this is not an exaggeration? It's an egregious reality for those in countless locations of this great USA. The new Jim Crow internalized oppression. I'm constantly reminded that many will never view my black life as a blessing. Land of the free, home of the brave. But when I choose to speak up, they tell me to sit down, shut up, and behave. It's better than the massa, though. He beat me with a sword of rings and a lynching rope. But is this emotional pain still worthy to be healed? Are the wicked systems that kill still worthy to be revealed? Torn down, like my soul? No Negroes, dogs, or Jews allowed. But when a black man is beat down, dogs get better treatment than he does somehow. We justify it. We call out his criminal record from a rigged system that prepared him for this. Anger is raging, hatred is taking, no Negroes, dogs, or Jews allowed. That same history still separates us now. You see, telling my story does not victimize me. It is, in fact, the only way that we can start to really be free. Fear and assumptions keep us apart, but now there's a clarion divine call to reset and restart. This will only happen through relationships. They serve as a mirror for our biases and flaws. Together, we can tear down this wicked system of white supremacy that oppresses us all. Hello, my name is Unity. We don't all have to be the same to be free. Your color can benefit my color so that all colors can be free. And your privilege does not have to be used to weaponize me. Meaning well is not enough. Systemic changes will forever change the trajectory of Black births. You don't have to feel guilt or shame. Instead, use your privilege to ensure that my life and the life of my ancestors will not be in vain. Stereotypes annihilate unity. Are you understanding that you have a choice into whom you will be, how you will respond, what you will do, if you will allow fear and silence as complicity to paralyze you? So I ask you again, what is your name? Remember, we all stand on the backs of someone's shoulders. Just make sure you're not standing on our neck.
I would just ask you to just take a minute to think about some of the images that Dominique has raised in this short spoken word piece, and just see what kind of comes up for you as you hear her words. And as images come to you, if you would just jot them down, later on we can talk about them a little bit. I want to move along and not stop to do that now, but I do want to hear some of how you have responded to her. I've heard this piece so many times, and every time I hear it, it feels like I'm hearing it almost for the first time again. And now listen to the words of the former Port Laureate, Joy Harjo. We're running out of breath as we ran out to meet ourselves. We were running out of breath as we ran out to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Even if you played pool and drank to remember to forget, we made plans to be professional and did. And some of us could sing, so we drummed a firelit pathway up to those starry stars. Sin was invented by the Christians, as was the devil, we sang. We were the heathens, but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with the Pueblo as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June, 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. We know the rumors of our demise. We spit them out. They die. And Joy Harjo said, if my work does nothing else, when I get to the end of my life, I want Native peoples to be seen as human beings. If my work does nothing else, when I get to the end of my life, I want Native peoples to be seen as human beings. I think that one of the basic struggles for any group of people that have been marginalized and traumatized and denigrated is to somehow continuously find a way to affirm their own humanity and find a way to make that humanity visible in the world in which they have to live. So people of color, no matter what color, struggle up against this issue of not being made into something other than who they really are, and being heard and seen as themselves rather than caricatures of those white folks looking through lenses of denigrating narratives. And so when we talk about the external changes, like, being able to go sit in a restaurant or sit on a bus, you're not getting at any of this stuff here that really is at the core of making it so difficult to be a human being of color in this culture. And it's really important for white people to get this because, one of the things that I've done this work now for 50 years, and I have worked with people in the Episcopal Church here for a good chunk of time. And this is so important to get to just take your shoes off and stand in the place of oppressed people and kind of know what that's like. To take your shoes off and ask folks who are at the end of that oppressing equation, can I walk a while in your shoes? Can I walk a while in your shoes so I can really know? So I won't be guessing, so I won't be projecting, so I won't be imagining, but I'll know. And to walk without editing, to walk without doing anything, just knowing. And it's so important to know that you don't have to do anything but care enough to be brokenhearted as you walk in those shoes. That's all. To just know, when you sit with me, this. I have 2 sons. When my sons are out and about in the city and living their lives as young men do, I am a little bit on edge because I'm hoping that they won't get killed by some trigger happy cop or some white supremacist or somebody trying to make a point but around race somehow. Now, I do not wake up in the mornings worrying that my sons are going to die today. I'm not that crazy. I could be if I let myself, but I just refuse to do that. But it's like when you about to have a headache, it's just like having a low-grade fever. It's not quite enough to put you in the bed, but it takes the edge off of everything just a little bit. It destabilizes you just a little bit. And it's always good to know when they are back in their house and they're in the house and they're safe. Now, if you want to walk with me, you have to understand that's a part of the walk. You have to be ready to not be trying to talk me out of it and to explain to me anything about it in order to make it easier or better. You just got to be in the burden with me. That's the work. And there's no requirement. I mean, you can't fix it any better than I can fix it. We're all working to try to fix it, but you get my point. I'm not I think that so many times some of the behavior that we have to keep interrogating ourselves about is this overzealousness about wanting to explain to people of color why they ought to feel better. And none of us want to hear it. We want companionship in the struggle. We want comradeship. We want pilgrimship, if that could be a word. We don't want allies. Please remember that. We're not looking for allies. Allyship is a contract. You decide you want to be a contractor for a while. So you go out and you find some folks that want you to do something and you sign on with them and you do it. You go to a few protests or you work on a project to get schools a little better, or you do this or that or the other. And that's, that's okay. That happens and that works. But in the faith community, we're looking to become fellow pilgrims, to walk alongside each other, to take our shoes off. And now the work of the oppressed people is to be willing to trust that you really do want to walk in our shoes. And most of us don't believe it. Most of us don't believe the white person who says, I really want to walk in your shoes because I really do want to walk with you on this pathway. This conversation this morning is about how do we heal this trauma? How do we speak to it? How do we live with it? How do we engage with it? We can study, we can read books, we can go on pilgrimages, we can be so progressive and so unconscious. Because it takes more than reading books and going on pilgrimages and erecting statues. It takes brokenhearted comradeship. And that's a whole lot harder than all of the rest of the stuff, which is why it doesn't get done. And I just want to keep on raising the banner and saying, in some ways it's simple because everybody can do it. You know, in other ways it's incredibly complicated because it will cost you. And it will take one lifetime. So there's no getting done. That's the other part that just is so hard to swallow. Because, you know, we're good Western people. We can figure things out and we can plot and we make projections and we're good capitalists and we know you make certain investments, you should get an expected outcome in return. It doesn't work that way. None of that works that way. It's messy, it's confusing, it's painful sometimes. Sometimes you think you're going backwards instead of forward. Sometimes you don't know what you're doing. And sometimes you wish you didn't have to do any of it. And sometimes you think you'll just vacate the planet or vacate the folks that keep on making things so hard for you. All of those emotions are real and acceptable. And it's across the board. You know, if you're a white person, you don't have to get up every morning being just ready to go lay your life down. If you're Black or brown or Native or whatever, you get up in the mornings and some mornings you say, just leave me alone. I love this David White poem that talks about sometimes you just want to lay down and tell God you got a headache. You know, leave me alone today because my head aches. And maybe on those days, we just need to, you know, nurse our headache. It would be better to nurse your headache than to give your headache, try to give your headache to somebody else. But the plea that I keep wanting to make all of the time is this: let us be very honest about where we are and what we're doing, and understanding that we're dealing with issues that are the wounds that are so deeply etched in the people of color in this country. And most of us don't even want to acknowledge it because we're busy trying to be okay. We're busy trying to say, well, we're liberated now and we're better, you know, and everything's good. That's not so. It's not so. You look in our communities, you look at the struggles, you look at the deficits, you look at the violence, you look at a lot of the different kinds of things that are happening, and we're not okay. And we have to decide it's okay to confess that we're not okay. But we know that we can be okay because our ancestors have taught us that we can survive and that we can get well. But I want you to listen to this. Listen to this description here from this man who was a slave. Who can imagine what could be the feelings of a father and mother when looking upon their infant child whipped and tortured with impunity and placed in a situation where they could afford it, no protection. But we were all claimed and held as property. The father and the mother were slaves. I was compelled to stand and see my wife shamefully scourged and abused by her master. And the manner in which this was done was so violently and inhumanly committed upon the person of a female that I despair and find indecent language to describe the bloody act of cruelty. My happiness or pleasure was then all blasted, for it was sometimes a pleasure to be with my family, even in slavery. I loved them as my wife and child. Little Frances was a pretty child. She was quiet, playful, bright, and interesting, but I could never look upon the dear child without being filled with sorrow and fearful apprehensions of being separated by slaveholders because she was a slave, regarded as property. And unfortunately for me, I am the father of a slave. It calls fresh to my mind the separation of husband and wife, of stripping, tying up, and flogging, of tearing children from their parents and selling them on the auction block. It calls to mind female virtue, virtue trampled underfoot. But oh, when I remember that my daughter, my only child, is still there, destined to share the fate of all these calamities, is too much to bear. If ever there was any one act of my life while a slave that I have to lament over, it is that of being a father and a husband of slaves. And then there's a story of a Native person describing whenever foreigners, white folks came to their house, the children would run. Sometimes they'd go run in the woods, and sometimes they would run wherever they could go to hide because they were worried that they were about to be taken. Now, I want you to think for a little while about what can you imagine that would be the internal damaging that's happening when you've got this environment? And how many generations would it take to recover from it? So, and this whole conversation this morning is not about guilt, because I don't believe guilt is a valuable emotion. I think it may be necessary sometimes, but I don't think it's valuable because it is immobilizing and it keeps you from doing what you could be doing. It keeps you from acting and doing something. When you spend your energy feeling guilty, you wear yourself out, but you didn't do anything. So if you gotta be, if somehow that's a part of your process, it needs to be, don't give it a residence. Get through it as fast as you can. But this conversation is about what does it take for us to be more empathetic and compassionate? And one of the shortest, there are many things that we have a short supply of in our culture, but one of them is empathy for people of color. It is so difficult. I think about 3 or 4 years ago, they did some experiments with young white people coming to medical school, asking them about tolerance, pain tolerance in people of color. Do you know that those young 21st century white people believed that Black people can tolerate more pain than white folks and need less pain medicine? That ridiculous notion has been around forever. And of course, there's been a whole lot of really mean-hearted stuff done to try to prove that to be the case. Now, this is really sad to think about, that, we have this crazy notion that, well, if we just let all the old racists die, racism would be gone. And that's just so not true. Because we've done a really good job of cementing these understandings, these narratives, these ways of denigrating and projecting into the cultural fabric. And the young people have been great scholars in learning those lessons and internalizing those messages. And so we're not going to get rid of this just because old folks die. And you know that actually already. That's not news to you, unfortunately. I wish, sometimes it would be nice if you could think, well, those folks were the ones, and now we don't have them anymore. But that's not true. The truth is that the narrative is in the air, and we've all have been breathing it. And we have to keep trying to clear our system of that narrative and hear a new and fresh narrative. One of my most favorite words is metanoia. I just love that word because I just think a new way to see is just so liberating. And all of us need a new way to see, because we don't have, even no matter how hard we try, we don't catch many glimpses of what God's trying to do. Right? I mean, we're just struggling with that. We're just, like we think we got it together, and God's laughing at us going, you didn't even get close yet. So, but if we can just keep being willing to open up the lens and look a little better and be a little clearer, then we can make some steps forward. And when all of us are doing this work, that's what we're trying to do. And as Howard Thurman has said, we're basically trying to get our own selves out of prison. We're trying to liberate ourselves. And in the process of doing that, we create energy in the spaces where other people can come into that and find liberation as well. You will never hear me talk about racial reconciliation, because there is nothing to reconcile when it comes to race in the United States. Racial reconciliation is a term, as far as I'm concerned, that should be eliminated from our vocabularies until we have done the work of healing, until we have come to really understand deeply what trauma has done to all people of color and to white people. We don't need to be talking about trying to be reconciled. We need to be talking about trying to get well. And then well people can build relationships to each other, not broken people that are just conducting transactions. Do you think about this? All of the relationships, all of the interactions between slaves and white folks and Native people and white people, well, I don't want to say all, because some of them maybe have been kind of positive, but none of them were based on equality of humanity, that equal human beings were coming together to be together and making the choice to be together, because there was no choice making. This man just described what it was like for him. He had no agency that in terms of the external world. His only agency is inside of himself. His capacity to keep on loving, to love and to think about what it would be like to love somebody that you can't protect. You can't help. You have to watch them be treated in all kinds of ways, which is why some slave women chose to kill their babies. And I got a real good, clear dose of that when I had my son, and looked at that beautiful little boy and said to myself, if you were a slave, what would I do? Would I let you live, or would I rather see you dead than to have you be abused and misused and marginalized and brutalized and not be able to do anything about it? Nobody on the earth has the right to contribute to creating a system that makes people have to reflect upon something in that way. There's nobody that has that right. I think you've probably saw the movie Beloved, and remember that Phoebe kills, not Phoebe, is it Setha? I gotta get the names, I think it's Setha, kills the baby. Well, she's trying to kill, it's actually based on a true story, where this woman actually they escaped from slavery, and then they were about to be caught. And she was trying to kill all the kids, and she managed to kill one. And we can get up on our little morality horse and say, you don't have any right to do that and blah, blah, blah. But we don't have any way to know what it's like to live every day, not knowing what has happened to somebody that you love really deeply and dearly. So I find myself in a position of reserving, realizing that I don't have an opinion about that. All I can say is I don't know what I would do, but I understood it better when I looked in the face of this very beautiful boy and thought, what would it be like if I knew I couldn't take care of you? And I think that we have to ask, what is it like in the 21st century for people that have been the recipients of this kind of traumatizing marginalization historically, and they still live in a system that doesn't see them as real and as human. You know, we still have that energy. That's the problem. Though we changed a few rules and we made a few things different, the energy of marginalization and denigration and making invisible is so alive and well in the United States of America today. As we sit here together, that energy is alive and well. So then why do we keep talking about it? Because if we quit talking about it, it gets to go underground and it becomes even more deadly. And as we keep talking about it, it does have to keep on being interrogated. And we people of faith, you know, we people of faith have got a responsibility that folks who don't claim faith maybe can escape. But God is not pleased with what we have done. I can be sure of that. And if you have a God that you serve that is pleased, I don't really want to know anything about that God. Because God loves everybody equally. And I have to say to my sisters and brothers and siblings of color who want to denigrate white people, that you don't get to do that either. Because God loves white people the same as me. Even though, you know, I live with this every day with Black folks who tell me, well, I don't know how you do that work because I don't want to be in the same room with a room full of white folks. Well, or I think white people need to go do their work and we go do our work. We don't get, those are not our options in the church. We have to build community. We have to be together. We have to tell our stories. We have to share our wounds. We have to be honest. We have to be together. That is what we were supposed to do. Now, you know, if you need to work on some stuff, fine, but coming back together is the ultimate goal. It's not, the option is not separation. We tried that already and it doesn't work anyway. And the more separate we are from each other, the more we are able to maintain our projections and our false narratives about each other and keep our unconsciousness intact. And Brian Stevenson talks a lot about the necessity for proximity, that we need to be in some kind of proximity to the people that we're trying to build bridges with. So I think in your state, you've got more Native people, perhaps, than African Americans, maybe. I'm not sure. I didn't go look at the statistics, but that's kind of what I've been hearing from folks I've been talking to. It doesn't matter, you know, because part of it is about what's inside of you, and part of it is how willing are you to put yourself out to reach across lines of difference, to be with people who don't look like you and don't talk like you and don't act like you and don't think like you, and then build relationships. So then we can talk about something, building a new community, building a beloved community. Beloved community is another one of those words that I just think we need to put in a little folder and put in a file cabinet until we decide that we're willing to pay the price to create that. You know, when Dr. King talked about beloved community, let me tell you what he meant. He was talking about a community where everybody is free and everybody has all of the resources now, you hear what I said? Everybody is free and everybody has all of the resources that they need to become whoever it is God put them on the earth to be. So how do we do that with Native peoples? What do we need to do with how we have treated them? You know, we moved into their homes and told them to go live in a tent, really. And with African peoples, we snatched them from their homes and said, you don't get to live, you get to live in these shacks here that we've made and whatever, you get to be a slave. You know, so how are we gonna fix all of that? Until we get ready to fix it, we don't need to be talking about beloved community. Because most of the time when we talk about beloved community, we're talking about a few white folks and a few people of color being somewhere, acting like everything's okay, and not really dealing with what's not okay, not really asking the hard questions, not really delving into the journey and hearing each other without edit, hearing our stories without edit. You know, I need to let white folks tell me their stories without trying to tell them what the story ought to be. And white people need to let Black and brown and other people of color tell their stories without trying to tell them what the story ought to be. That's how healing happens. And it's messy. And you know that already. You know it's messy, you know it's hard. And you know a whole lot of folks that aren't planning on doing it. And as leaders, your job is to help them change their mind and understand that in order to be who God put you on the earth to be, you have to do this work. It's not even optional, which is what people seem to not have caught a glimpse of. It's actually a part of your spiritual formation to do this work. And I've just been surprised at how surprised people have been to find out that this is not social justice work. This is spiritual formation work. This healing of racialized trauma of setting up spaces where that healing can happen. And it happens in spaces where we're willing to tell the truth. And look at us as a nation. Now we're saying things like, we want to rewrite the history books because we don't want the kids to be uncomfortable. We want to rewrite the historical stories because we don't want children to hear how bad we were. Well, my goodness, we want everybody to be happy, and we just might as well hook everybody up to some kind of drug so you don't have to deal with reality, because reality is you're just not going to be tooling through life as if you're just running through a field of flowers every minute. And anybody who's silly enough to think that part of the way you can do that is to tell lies about the truth is just so not connected to reality. And right now, in all of our places, we have got this spirit running through the street, wanting to deny stuff and wanting to make things the way we want them to be. And, in some ways it's incredibly sad. In other ways, you just want to throw your hands up and say, well, okay, but we have to keep being resistors. We have to keep being resistors. And there are two groups of people, those who are resisting and those who are supporting and being complicit. And if we don't speak up and act up in terms of, I'm going to stand here and try to see if I can stay open for God's light to shine through me all the time. If we're not willing to do that, then we become a supporter of the negative narrative. And that's not a good place to be at all. So I want you to hold all of this poetry and Dominique's spoken word and the former slaves' testimony about what it felt like, and Joy Harjo's talking about wanting to make sure that Native people get seen as people, as humans. Hold all of that in your heart. You know, I love the line from the Magnificat that talks about Mary holding all the stuff the angel said in her heart. How do you hold all this in your heart? And it becomes information that informs us as we walk on the path. And so it's not like you're having to beat anybody up or being beaten up. That's not even the point. God's not trying to beat us up. God's just trying to love us into consciousness. We need to try to be participators with God in loving ourselves and others into consciousness. That's so much better than trying to beat folks into consciousness, because it doesn't work. You know, because as soon as you start that, they just run. So the loving kindness and brokenhearted compassion, those are the ingredients. Those are the tools. Those are the remedies that will make things different and better. And we have the access to those tools because we are people of faith. We can be brokenhearted because then we become co-partners with God in God's brokenheartedness. You know, you just think about if you created a world where you wanted people to live together in peace and harmony, and you wanted people to have the best life possible, and then we make the mess out of it that we've made, wouldn't your heart be broken? Don't you feel brokenhearted when people just mess up? You've been trying to help them for 20 years, and each time you think they got it together, they just mess up real big time again. It breaks your heart, as it should. And so we can become participants with God in the brokenheartedness about the ways in which we keep messing up the environment, messing up in so many different ways. And yet, each time we do, we're invited to get back on the track, to get back on the path, to get back on the journey, to pick up to grab our brother or sister's hand and say, I'm back. I fell off the path here a little bit on the way, but I'm back. And I'm going to stay here as best I can. And we'll probably fall off the trail some more, but each time we get ourselves back on the trail. And each time the angels rejoice when we do. You know, when I think about Bishop Desmond Tutu, how joyous he was, you know, and he and the Dalai Lama, weren't they just a pair? My goodness, they just, you know, they laugh about how ridiculous they could be. Both of them act like little naughty boys a lot of the time, and they said that about themselves. But in the face of the atrocities and the brokenness that Bishop Tutu lived with from birth to death, because even though South Africa was liberated, South Africa's in a mess still, with so much trouble and struggle. And yet he managed to find the light, and he managed to connect to God in ways that made it possible for him to live the best life he could. So as oppressed people, we know we have all this stuff that's happened to us, but we still have to say yes to life. We still have to be creative. We still have to find why God put us here, and what are we supposed to be doing. And it's not magic. And it's not something to be marveled at. It is just people stepping up to the plate, trying to say yes to the leadership of the Holy Spirit. And we don't want anybody to make a to-do over it, because all we're trying to do every day is stay focused and stay faithful. And that's what all of us have to do. That is the call for every one of us who claims to have faith, to stay focused and stay faithful. And as we are understanding all of ourselves as being wounded and seeking healing, then we stop having to be so enamored with people of color doing whatever they do. You know, we laugh in the communities of color about how white people are so amazed by our strength You know, we don't have that much strength. We just have determination to be faithful. We don't like to suffer any more than anybody else. You know, Langston Hughes wrote that beautiful poem, Mother to Son. You know that poem, but let me tell you, child, my life ain't been no crystal stair, but we would like a crystal stair sometimes. You know, we don't want to always be in the floor with the nails and the splinters. We didn't get put here to suffer all the time any more than anybody else, and we don't enjoy suffering any more than anybody else. And we don't have any corner on the resilience market. The folks that have been the victims of racialized trauma don't have any corner on the resilience market. They're just trying to keep on being faithful human beings on the earth. And so they keep on getting up. And getting up in spite of, you know, in spite of the fact that the prisons are filled up with people of color, and we keep on building more of them because we assume that that's going to be their plight. That we keep on getting up in spite of the ways in which people of color continue to be marginalized and denigrated. You know, the Latino people at the border, keep on getting up. The Latinx people at the border, keep on getting up, keep on leaving from those countries that we have helped to destabilize, because they believe that there's a God in the universe who loves them and things can be better. But if we want to romanticize any of that, we're just on the wrong track. If we want to get caught up in, oh, they're so resilient and they're so happy and they're so no, don't do that. Don't characterize them that way. They're just people trying to say yes to the God of the universe in the best ways they know how. And it's not to be held up as some great, big, amazing thing, because folks are paying a high price, a very high price, to live the lives that they live. Taking that into account is very sobering for all of us, as we need to be sobered by those realities. And then we need to put them into this heart pocket that we have that helps us to engage better with folks that we meet on the pathway as we try to be the healers that God put us here to be. You see, I hope that you are hearing this in the spirit that I am bringing it to you, because it is about, let us stop acting like little kids running around with no sense and get on the right track. Let us get into the toughness of this with the kind of love that God's got, and stop, you know, we run our mouths about love and we don't have a clue what we're even talking about. We run our mouths about, I'm so sick of all of it. Aren't you sick of it? We just keep talking about stuff that we don't do any, it's not empowering, because it's all about just, can we keep smattering love and beloved community and racial reconciliation around without going into the core and digging out the real wounds and saying, here, let the light shine on this and let some real healing happen. So then I don't have to keep on saying how much I love somebody, because it becomes clear. There is a book called, I think it's called Sula, and it's by Toni Morrison. And there's an amazing scene in that book where one of the daughters is talking to her mother. She's really upset because her mother doesn't tell her she loves her. Her mother never says, I love you. So but her mother has one leg. She has one leg. And so the daughter is railing at the mother, and the mother is rubbing the stub. And you know why she has a stub? Because her husband was killed, and she went and laid down on the railroad track and let the train run over her so she could get some money so her family wouldn't starve. Now, I don't suggest that as a way to survive. but it's a novel after all. And Toni Morrison wrote it. So I'm not trying to be a moral authority here about that. Because the real point is this: you want me to say I love you, and because I didn't say it, you think you're not loved. But I loved you so much until I sacrificed a part of my body so you wouldn't starve. And that's Morrison's point. You know, so all of these words we like to flip around all over the place don't mean a thing until they get backed up with behavior. And here she sat, rubbing that stub while her daughter flailed at her about, you know, how am I supposed to know you're my mother and you never say you love me? And then we run around saying, I love you, I love you. We love, you know, we talk about the way of love. I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. I don't know how that is supposed to engage us in the work of walking with each other in our brokenness and holding each other's hands and being the wounded healers that Nouwen talks about. I don't know how this notion of what love are we talking about. I just, by the way, the publishing company will give me a fit if I don't tell you that my new book, The Night is Long, but Light Comes in the Morning, Meditations on Racial Healing, is now available through Church Publishing and Amazon and Target and a whole bunch of places. And I just actually got it yesterday in hardcover, and I'm so excited about it. So I want you to know about it. But I wrote an essay and I wrote a meditation in there about what kind of love, whose love. And if you look at that, if you look at love in 1 Corinthians 13, or if you look at love in terms of Howard Thurman's notion of the love ethic in relationship to this whole healing business, it's pretty tough stuff. And there's no whipped cream here. There's no fluff. There is a real kind of energetic reconstruction of ourselves that's necessary to be brought to the equation. And when I read, you know, when you read 1 Corinthians 13 about love, it's incredibly sobering. Because how do I love that way? How do I love that way? And I think that we do people such a disservice because we tell them that they're supposed to do all these things, but we don't tell them how. And so I want to take a couple minutes now to say something about a psychological principle that I think is very much an undergirder in everything that I've been talking about so far this morning. And then I will have talked far longer than I should. And I want to stop so you can have a chance to ask a question or make a comment if you wish to do so. Part of what's the matter with us is our own unresolved stuff has to go somewhere. We have to do something with it. We've got all these, one author calls it our many selves. We've got these little, if you can imagine with me, because you see, I love to imagine about this stuff, that there's a little inner community, whole little working community inside. And Howard Thurman talks about it as having even streets inside of you. And there's things just running around doing whatever they do. Well, what is that community made up of is one of the questions that has to get answered. Now, remember, we're talking about healing, but you're not going to heal anybody if you don't get well yourself. You know, it's just not going to happen. And Jimmy Baldwin says, you can't heal everything you can name, but you're never going to heal anything you don't name. So we got to name what's in our inner community. What's in our inner community that needs to get well? What is it in us that's okay with violence, that's okay with marginalization, that's okay with traumatizing people of color? They can't even see it as traumatizing because we don't see them fully. We think that they don't suffer. Remember those medical students sinking? And remember you may have read the story of the physician in New York who died, a Black woman physician who died when she was telling them she needed more medication for pain and was refused it because they didn't believe it. She's a physician, and they didn't believe her. Because after all, you're Black and you should be able to stand more suffering than somebody else. So I'm not, this is really complicated and complex and hard to think about, that somebody would look at you and think you don't need as much medication as somebody else because your skin is brown or Black or not white. And that means that you think that there are different species here, you see. And that's a problem because all of us are like the same. We just got some different coverings. We're all the same. There is no biological difference as a basis for us as human beings. We've all got hearts and brains, and we function in a whole bunch of animals like us too. So when you get that straight in your head, you get over looking at folks just who look different and start thinking about them being different. So what is love? How does our concept of love strip away some of those cultural narratives that make it impossible for us to really see who's out there and willing to see who's in here, that makes it hard for us to see who's out there? What kind of love does it take to make you really look at yourself and see who you really are and still love yourself? We say you're supposed to love yourself, love your neighbor as yourself, and love God. Well, if you don't love yourself, it's a pretty tall order to be trying to love somebody else. And if you don't know who's in your community, you don't even know what it means to love yourself. Because what is yourself? Who is yourself? And some of you are old enough to remember that comedian Flip Wilson. Remember how Flip Wilson used to, anything that he didn't want to take responsibility for, he always said the devil made him do it. But there was internal energy systems operating in him that were making him be contrary to what he wanted to be. And St. Paul said, things I want to do, I don't do. Things I don't want to do, I do. So that conflict has always been operating for centuries. And that in psychological terms, is shadow stuff. It's the stuff in us that's unconscious, unresolved, and that needs to be brought to the light. When the light shines on it, we can see a little better. Our nighttime dreams and people that make us crazy, a whole bunch of things help us to get clues about our shadow. And until we get some clues about that, we will just keep on doing the same thing. We keep on doing the same thing. We keep on hurting people. We keep on being able to abide hurt people being hurt. We keep on playing games. We can play a good game. We can play a really good game. And we can delude ourselves into thinking that we're doing pretty well. But when we really interrogate ourselves at the deepest level, we find out that we need to stand up a little taller. But no matter how much we need to stand up a little taller or interrogate ourselves a little better, we need to be loving and kind toward ourselves. Because to the extent that I am loving and kind toward myself, I will be loving and kind toward others. To the extent that I confront my own unconsciousness, I will be able to let other people be who they are. So if you catch yourself just really denigrating somebody and really needing to have them move off the planet, you need to sit down and ask what's going on inside of yourself. And be careful what you say about that person out there. Because what you're saying about them has a whole lot to do with what's inside of you. In the last couple of years, I have become preoccupied with the Kierkegaardian notion of what does it mean to have purity of heart. Kierkegaard said purity of heart is to will one thing And you have to say, well, will what? What is the one thing? And I think it is to will one thing, to have purity of heart, is to be always focused on trying to go forward toward that kind of clarity and openness to your own self. So there's no need to have to judge and denigrate and marginalize and injure or say bad things or even think bad things about other people. And maybe that is then the essence of coming to really love somebody. As Howard Thurman says, to love somebody, the love ethic requires us to love people beyond all of their faults and all of their gifts and talents and everything. You just erase all of that and you just love what's left. And you know what? It's hard to even see what's left, because we always look at people in terms of, what can you do? What do you look like? How smart are you? How are you going to make me feel? What are you going to bring to this equation? Rather than you just showed up. I mean, you just showed up. I love you because you just showed up. I love you. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be anything. You just showed up. That's not easy to do. Have you ever thought about that? Just trying to love people without, well, how they got, being concerned about how they behave or what they do, you know? And then and I don't know that human beings are actually even really capable of that. I was asking myself the other day, do I think we're really capable of unconditionally loving somebody? I'm not sure. That is a big question to keep on interrogating and keep on investigating. So I want to stop right here and let you go all the way back to Dominique and tell me the words that may have popped up for you. Just you can just say them out around the screen, and then if you have any questions, and then Reverend Holly, if we could have the quilt image after this, because I want to talk a little bit about the quilted metaphor in regards to all the stuff I've been talking about, that would be helpful.
Great. Well, I'd like to first thank you, Dr. Meeks, for your keynote address and all that you've already offered today. I want to thank those who have been watching the live stream, and I will send Teresa a link that has just the image that Dr. Meeks is referring to, so that those who have been watching on YouTube can see that piece that she's referring to. So thank you to Teresa for her skillful technology help. Been wonderful to have you by my side and helping the live stream.